I know some of you likely watched the Steelers' first preseason game yesterday. I unfortunately, I wasn't able to, but because my family and I went up to Erie, enjoyed some time at the beach yesterday. It was a great time. But I did see the highlights after the fact. Did y'all see that kick? Did you hear about this kick? Did you see it? Did you hear about it? No? Well, you will. In the Steelers' first preseason game, a brand new drafted kicker for the Jaguars, whom we were playing from Jacksonville, he binked a 70-yard field goal attempt. 70 yards. First preseason game of the year, he kicks the longest kick in NFL history. I mean, what? Wild. Like, insane. They were like, just throw him out there. They were like on our 40-yard line, or their 40-yard line. They're like, let's just let him take a shot at it. Commentators like, well, at least you'll know how long he can kick for future reference if it ever comes up in a future game. And he nails it. Like, nobody could believe it. It was crazy. Crazy. I've always been fascinated by, like, weird records of human achievement, world records, and the people who pursue them. The most hot dogs consumed in 10 minutes. Anyone know how many? 83. 83. The fastest 100-meter run. Anyone? 9.58 seconds. The most number of plates spun atop sticks at the same time. You got the number? 108. 108 by name of David Spathaki. I don't know why I mentioned his name, but yeah, David Spathaki spun 108 plates on top of sticks at the same time. Why? Why do you want to have that right? Why do people pursue these things? We watched America's Got Talent this past year, and during one of the tryouts, some lady wanted to break the hula hoop record. Did you see the hula hoop record? So we're watching, we're thinking, she's just going to spin a hula hoop around her waist for as long as she can and see if she can break the record. No, it wasn't around her waist. It was around her bum. She spun it around her bum. I didn't look up the amount of time she did it, but she did. She broke the record. She achieved the Guinness Book of World Records title. World records fascinate me. And coincidentally, I was flipping through some stories this week, and I stumbled upon an article about another person with an amazing world record. Only this person's world record is one I'm sure, won't be broken anytime soon. Does anyone recognize the name of Vesna Vulovic? Vesna Vulovic. I assume not, so don't worry if you don't. Oh, you did? Oh, I thought you were raising your hand. Oh, Vesna Vulovic. You won't soon forget this name, because Vesna, as a young Serbian woman in 1972, earned the still-standing world record for the person with the highest fall survived without a parachute. Vesna was a flight attendant on the Yugoslav Airlines Flight 367. Yugoslav Airlines Flight 367 tragically didn't land because it became a victim of a terrorist attack midair. A bomb detonated at 33,000 feet. Everyone on board that flight tragically perished, with one exception. Vesna was initially included among the list of those who were killed until an elderly man named Bruno just happened to be a former military medic during World War II, just happened to stumble upon this badly injured Vesna lying near a heavily wooded road outside his small village in what was then Czechoslovakia. Bruno was able to stabilize Vesna and care for her until she would eventually be rescued and transported to the hospital in Prague. It wasn't until days later that Vesna's parents would learn that their daughter had survived the attack. They initially received word, as you might expect, that she was among those who were deceased. They grieved her death. She was gone. Until she wasn't. As you can imagine, Vesna was badly injured for sure. She spent several weeks, actually almost a month, in a coma. She fractured her skull. She fractured her pelvis. She suffered 3 broken vertebrae in her back. She was paralyzed from the waist down for quite some time. However, eventually, over time, she was healed entirely, even gaining the ability to walk again. Experts who studied her case have concluded that what saved Vesna was the fact that she just happened to be working with the food cart in the plane when the tragedy struck. When the plane broke apart midair, she just happened to become wedged between the cart and the plane's fuselage, which just happened to descend to the earth at just the right angle in just the right location to ensure a smooth landing on a remote snow-packed hill in just the right place and slide just the right amount so that Bruno could eventually find her. Vesna would go on to become a national hero in the former Yugoslavia, modern-day Serbia, and she became a fierce advocate for freedom and political reform of her country, crediting her status, saying it's a gift from God. I got to use this for good. And so she became this fierce advocate for her country and her people. Later in life, when asked what she credits her survival with, she responded 3 things: her Serbian stubbornness, her diet of chocolate, spinach, and fish oil. But in all seriousness, her greatest credit she gave to God, saying, "To God be the glory in all things, even this tragedy. To God be the glory." She would go on to profess her faith the rest of her life until she ultimately passed away in 2016. Vesna's record of the highest fall survived without a parachute still stands. And I'm pretty sure it'll safely remain there for a long time. I was fascinated by Vesna's story, not only because it's a fascinating world record, as I mentioned, I love those stories, but because of the shocking twists the whole ordeal takes along the way. Imagine being Vesna's parents. They're so proud of their daughter. She's a young Serbian woman making her way through life in what was then a politically and economically struggling country of Yugoslavia. She had a great career. She was traveling the world, which for someone her age was an exceptionally rare opportunity. Then suddenly they get a call. She's gone. Their lives are destroyed, the grief unbearable. A few days later, however, they get another call. She's alive. She's in a coma. She's terribly injured, but she's alive. Then they watched her grow to become a national hero and a fierce advocate for her people and her country. The twists and turns of Vesna's story might be more intense than a daytime soap opera, but they also happen to parallel the twists and turns of the story we just read here in the book of Acts chapter 12. No, there's no plane disasters in Acts 12. No, there's no stories of people falling tens of thousands of feet and surviving to tell the tale in Acts chapter 12. But even still, some describe Acts chapter 12 as one of the most dramatic chapters in the entire book. Ironically, it also happens to be a story when we read the book of Acts, it's one of those stories we sometimes just kind of gloss over. And we perhaps even just skim and otherwise don't take notice of it. Think about the context of this chapter, how we've gotten to where we are in the history of the church so far to date. Last week and the week before, we read through Acts chapter 10 and Acts chapter 11. We talked about the story of Peter and how Peter went to a man's house named Cornelius, thereby sharing his faith with Cornelius and Cornelius' family. They were the first recorded Gentile converts to the Christian faith in the book. The Christian faith, empowered and emboldened by the Holy Spirit, is experiencing fantastic growth. A chapter prior to that, Saul, the most prominent Jewish leader who was leading the charge against the church, was himself converted by a supernatural encounter with Jesus. Things were going well. We even read back in Acts chapter 9, Luke says, then the church throughout Judea, Galilee, and Samaria enjoyed a time of peace and was strengthened. Things were going well in the church. Things were growing. Things were going in the right direction. Until suddenly it wasn't. In chapter 12, verse 1, Luke interrupts the story with this devastating headline. It's about this time, when things are going well, when things are going swimmingly, when everything's at where it should be, when things are going as they should, as people expected them to be. It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. Imagine you're part of that ancient church. Imagine what you must be feeling. There was a time when things were bad. We read a lot about those times when the Jewish leaders were attacking the church, even arresting its leaders. But do you remember what happened back then in Acts chapter 5? We read that the high priest and all of his associates who were members of the party of the Sadducees, they were filled with jealousy over the church. They arrested the apostles. Peter, James, John, they arrested these men who were leading this new thing called the church, and they put them in a public jail. But during the night, an angel of the Lord opened the doors of the jail and brought them out. Now, according to the best estimates, it's been a few years since that incident happened. And sure, in the meantime, Stephen had been killed. There was a martyrdom of Stephen that happened. But even the Jewish leaders at that point must have recognized what happened as a result of the martyrdom, right? The gospel spread. The church grew. The church was strengthened as a result of Stephen being killed. So, as far as we can tell from the text, even the Jewish leaders stopped persecuting the church, at least as aggressively as they had been. We're not getting a whole lot of references to that anymore. God truly is with the church. So peace was prevailing. So I have to assume that when King Herod makes the decision to arrest members of the church here in Acts chapter 12, that's pretty much what they were confident was going to happen again. No worries. God's got our back, right? Our people will surely be released just like they were last time. King Herod must just not have gotten the memo of how things were handled last time. Our people were arrested. They walked right out of prison. Surely that's about to happen again. Except that's not at all how it works out, at least not at the beginning, is it? In verse 2, King Herod, we're told King Herod had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. Wait, what? James is dead? James was murdered? Killed by Herod? That's not how this is supposed to play out, God. You released our people from prison before, God. We see what you were doing through Stephen's death. We got it. Yeah, Stephen's death, it happened. It was sad. It was tragic, but it brought so many people to the faith. It propelled the church throughout the known world. We get that. We understand that. But what about James? What's going on here with James? Luke goes on to explain that Herod got some positive response from his sudden decision to persecute the church out of nowhere. All of a sudden, the Jews are like cheering for Herod. This was a major political win for him. So he took it a step further, and we read in verse 3, when he saw that this was met with approval from the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter as well. This happened during the festival of unleavened bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. Herod arrested Peter, the single most popular and significant person in the church in Judea, and he had him arrested during Passover. Do you remember who else was arrested during Passover? It's the Sunday school answer, guys. Come on. Jesus, thank you. Jesus. Just a few years prior now, Jesus was arrested, and he was crucified during and after Passover. This wasn't by chance. This was political theater at its finest. This was an intentional attack on a high Jewish holiday to earn Herod political points with his subjects. And just to be sure, his plan would actually play out precisely as he orchestrated, Herod had Peter personally secured, not by 1, 2, or 3 guards. We're told 4 soldiers within 4 squads each. 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. 16 men, if you want to do that math. Tom's not here, so he can't do my math for me, but I'm pretty sure that's 16 men in total who were employed to ensure Peter remained in prison until his public trial. Something tells me Herod got word of what happened last time, when Peter and some of the other apostles were arrested and they just waltzed out of jail with the help of an angel. He wasn't going to be embarrassed like the Jewish leadership were when the apostles just walked out of prison and continued to preach the gospel in the temple against their orders. Now, let's put ourselves back in the shoes of the church again. They too remember what happened last time the apostles were arrested. God released them. However, this time, James was killed. And on top of that, Peter is now sitting there with 16 men watching his every move. If ever there was a more dramatic swing in confidence, I'm not sure I could name it. God was with them before and saw that the apostles walked out of prison in Acts chapter 5. Here in Acts chapter 12, the apostles are being arrested again, only this time, one's already killed and the other has more eyes and security on him than Jeffrey Epstein. It's hopeless. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. I know what some of you are screaming at me in your minds. It's not hopeless. The church isn't hopeless. Don't you remember what we read in the very next verse here in verse 5? Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. The church was praying for Peter. How can you describe the situation as hopeless if Luke says the church was praying for him? If they felt it was hopeless, why would they even bother praying? You don't have to raise your hand for this, but I want to ask a question. Have you ever uttered what you might describe as a hopeless prayer? Have you ever been there? You know what I'm talking about. Have you ever been so down and out, so desperate, so discouraged, that even though you're still praying, even though you're still remaining as faithful as you can, even though you're still doing what your pastor said you should be doing in desperate times, which is to pray, in the back of your mind is a soundtrack going something like, yeah, right. I know how this is going to end up. I know where this is going. I know how this is going to end, and it's not going to be how I want it to end. Have you ever been there? You don't have to admit it publicly, but I will. I've certainly prayed those hopeless prayers before. I've allowed those doubts to creep into my mind before. Just like the members of the first century church in Jerusalem, I've hopelessly gone through the motions of my faith before and prayed all the while wondering to myself, what's the point? Friends, here's the first thing that I want you to know from this text this morning, the first lesson that is simply screaming at me whenever I read the words Luke recorded here nearly 2,000 years ago. We serve a God who answers even the most hopeless of prayers. We serve a God who answers even the most hopeless of prayers. Now, some of you might still be wondering why I'm convinced that while the church was praying for Peter, they were doing so with a sense of hopelessness in their spirit. And the answer is in how they responded to their prayers actually being answered. It shows up later in the text. Peter's in prison. He's being guarded by 4 squads of 4 men each. He has eyes on him at all times. There's no escaping that, at least by no human means, at least. But with God, there's always a way. Peter's released. And we'll talk about the circumstances and the details of how he escapes in just a moment. For now, I simply want to draw your attention to what happened after God got him out of prison. We're told he headed to the house of Mary. This is John Mark's mother. And it happens to be a place where many in the church had been gathering. Perhaps we're told that they had gathered, they were praying there. And Luke says in verse 13, Peter knocked at the outer entrance. And a servant named Rhoda came to the door. When she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed, she ran back without opening it and exclaimed, "Peter's at the door." But you see how they respond to her? You're out of your mind. You're out of your mind, they told her. When she kept insisting that it was so, they instead suggested it must be his angel, which is an obscure line I'll briefly explain in a minute. But Peter kept on knocking. And when the door finally opened, they saw him and they were astonished. They were astonished. You're out of your mind, they told poor Rhoda. It can't possibly be him. It's more likely to be someone they described as his angel. Now, this goes back to an ancient Jewish belief that when a person died, they would get a personal angelic messenger of the fact that they had died. So someone would, a messenger would come to the family or to a close person to the person who was deceased, and so an angel would appear in theory to declare that an individual was dead. So in other words, it's more likely that Peter was executed earlier than expected in their minds, even though they're praying for him. It's more likely that he actually was killed, like James was killed, than it is for him to have actually been released from prison as they were praying for him to be released. That's why I described their prayers as what I call hopeless prayers. When they saw him, they were astonished. My mind goes back to that story I just told you about Vesna. Her parents were told she was dead. A few days later, they get to call it somehow, some way. We don't know how. She's alive. I'm not sure astonished properly captures the emotion of those conversations for either of those groups. Keep praying. I don't care how hopeless, I don't care how desperate the situation may seem. Just keep praying. We serve a God who answers even the most hopeless of prayers. All right, now we have to take a minute to talk about Peter and what happened to him while he was in prison. So we're going to kind of backtrack a little bit. I don't know if you caught it, but Luke tells us something quite incredible. He tells us something quite incredible in his description of the scene inside prison. Did you catch it? I'm not talking about the way the chains fell off Peter's hands. I'm not talking about the way the doors swung open. I'm not talking about the way that the angel led Peter by all the guards who had their eyes, or at least in theory, had their eyes on him. I'm talking about the fact that Peter was sleeping. Luke says in verse 6 and 7, the night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. I love this sentence for some reason. It just makes me laugh. He struck Peter on the side to wake him up. Like, wake up! Come on! Peter was sleeping, and he had to be woken up. We need to be sure to set the stage here. Peter's in prison. He's not only behind bars, he's currently shackled. And in addition to being shackled, he's chained to a couple of guards. I'm not sure about you, but there's a lot of things I might be doing in this scenario, but I'm pretty confident I wouldn't be comfortably snoozing. Just taking a little nap. But that's precisely what's going on here when the angel appears. Do you remember who this Peter used to be back when he was with Jesus in the Gospels? I mean, here's a scene to jog your memory. In Mark chapter 4, that day when evening came, Jesus told his disciples, let's go over to the other side of the lake. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern. What was he doing? He was sleeping on a cushion. The disciples, this includes Peter, woke him and said, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, Quiet, be still. Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? They includes Peter, were terrified and asked each other, Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. This is the same Peter who was so terrified in the boat that he and the other disciples woke Jesus as he slept and became even more terrified when Jesus calmed the storm with mere words. This is the same Peter who was so fearful when Jesus invited him to walk on water that he nearly drowned. This is the same Peter who was so afraid after Jesus was crucified that he willingly and intentionally denied even knowing him 3 times. This Peter, who was once known primarily for his fear and his prevailing lack of faith, is now sleeping comfortably the night before he's supposed to be put on trial and potentially and likely executed. Why? I suggest it's because Peter learned this lesson, which is the second lesson in your handout this morning. We serve a God who is always in control. We serve a God who's always in control, even when we sleep. Here's something to remember. Perhaps you should write this down. God doesn't need you to do anything. He doesn't. He's in total control. Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't invite us along for the journey. That doesn't mean he won't use us to be his hands and feet at times. Scripture is clear about that. Many people have encountered that. God does amazing things through us because he wants to do things through us, but he doesn't need us. Luke wrote that Peter wasn't even fully aware of what was happening after the angel woke him up. God was in complete control the entire time. As David once wrote back in Psalm 4, in peace I will lie down and sleep. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. Look, I know anxiety is something a lot of people struggle with. I know worry and fear is a real problem for many people, and sometimes these things ramp up to a clinical level requiring clinical intervention. But I want to suggest something that I truly believe. Do you know what anxiety, fear, and worry are at their core? Do you know where they start? They start from a lack of trust in God and a desire and a desperate need to personally be in control of all things at all times. That's what it comes from. Now, I get it. Sometimes we need clinical intervention for these things. Sometimes we need to be assisted with these struggles. But that's the basic definition and the basic recipe for nearly every case of anxiety, worry, and fear. A lack of trust in God and a desperate need to be in control of all things at all times. If you're struggling with anxiety, worry, or fear, especially if it's to a degree that it's keeping you up at night and you're losing sleep, you can't sleep like Peter slept, I want you to try practicing casting your fears on God. I want you to practice the discipline of faithfulness, the discipline of trust. Force yourself. Tell God out loud if you have to. Tell him you're giving him total control. You can't handle this yourself. Release yourself from having to solve every issue because you can't do it. You're finite. But he's not. He's not. He's the Almighty. He's the Alpha and the Omega. He's the creator and sustainer of all things. There's nothing too big for him. Release your worries. Release your fears. Trust him. And see if that doesn't help you get a little sleep at night. We serve a God who answers even the most hopeless of prayers. We serve a God who's always in control, even when we sleep. I want to finish this chapter with one more short but vital reminder. It's obvious from the context of the chapter that Herod was in some political hot water at this particular time of the story. He needed a win. He needed a win with the Jews, so he had Peter and James arrested. James he killed. Peter was miraculously released, so Herod killed the 16 guards he hired to secure him. Next, we're told about this issue with the people of Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon were in some sort of a fight with Herod, but Judea, the nation that he ruled, was their primary source of food, so they made peace with Herod. As a result of all these political victories, Herod clearly felt proud of himself. Luke says that on the appointed day, Herod, wearing his royal robe, sat on a throne and delivered a public address. And in response to his public address, they shouted, "This is the voice of a God, not of a mere man." Herod's haughty. He's proud. He's winning. Until he wasn't. Immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down and was eaten by worms and died. But the word of God continued to spread and flourish. You see, the twists and turns of the drama in our story didn't end with Peter's miraculous escape. The drama of Acts chapter 12 concludes when God reminded those with eyes to see of one final lesson. We serve a God who will never share credit and always deserves our praise. We serve a God who never shares credit and always deserves our praise. Every good thing is a gift from God, everything, whether he answers our most hopeless prayers while we sleep, or he graciously and intentionally uses us and our humble gifts to fulfill his will in our midst. Regardless of how he acts, every ounce of credit, every ounce of praise, every ounce of glory must always and will always go to God. As the psalmist once said, "Not to us, Lord, not to us, but to your name be the glory, because of your love and faithfulness." Despite Peter being arrested and despite James being murdered, the word of God continued to spread and flourish. To God be the glory. Despite multiple obstacles over the years, not the least of which was a global pandemic, and us literally being forced outdoors, the Hills Church remains. To God be the glory. Despite countless twists and turns in your own life, despite heartache and suffering, despite tragedy and betrayal, despite fears and failures, your faith remains strong, and your commitment to worship God with his church remains firm. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. To God be the glory. We serve a God who answers even the most hopeless of prayers. To God be the glory. We serve a God who is always in control, even when we sleep. To God be the glory. We serve a God who will never share credit and always deserves our praise. To God be the glory.